You wake up to an alarm you did not choose. You drag your body out of bed before it is ready, pour something hot and bitter into it to force it awake, and trade most of your daylight hours for money you already owe to someone else. This is normal. But the real reason your life feels this way is far stranger than stress, and it begins in a garden. You already know the story. A man and a woman, a garden where everything they needed simply grew. No farming, no labor, no alarm. The fruit hung within reach. The rivers ran clean, and the work of staying alive had not yet been invented. Then came one rule, one tree, one choice. And then came the part everyone remembers. They ate, and everything changed. But look closely at what actually changed. Most people think the punishment was death or shame or exile. Read the words again. The curse was work. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your bread. That is the sentence handed down. Not lightning, not fire, toil. The God of Genesis does not curse them with suffering in the abstract. He curses them with agriculture. Hold that thought, because something almost identical actually happened to your species, and we can date it. For roughly 300,000 years, your ancestors did not farm. They foraged. They moved across landscapes that fed them, taking what already grew and what already ran. Anthropologists have a name for these people: hunter-gatherers. And for a long time, we imagined their lives as brutal, desperate, and short. A struggle against a cruel world. But when researchers finally went and measured those lives, the picture inverted. In the 1960s, an anthropologist named Richard Borshay Lee lived among the Johansi of the Kalahari and did something simple. He counted the hours they spent getting food. The number stunned the field. Adults spent only 15 to 20 hours a week feeding themselves. The rest was rest, talk, ritual, play, sitting in the shade. Marshall Salins took that data and gave it a name that scandalized everyone: the original affluent society. Not affluent because they had much, but because they wanted little and the world already held it. Does that sound like anyone you know? A people who did not work to store, did not labor to own, and simply took what the ground offered freely. That is not a metaphor. That is a garden. So what happened? Why did your ancestors leave? Around 12,000 years ago, in a band of land arcing through the modern Middle East, human beings did something no animal had done at this scale. They planted. They took a wild grass with a swollen seed head and began to sow it, tend it, guard it, and harvest it. We call that grass wheat. We call that moment the agricultural revolution. And we were taught to call it progress. Jared Diamond, the physiologist and geographer, looked at the same moment and called it something else. The title of his famous essay is not subtle: The Worst Mistake in the History of the Human Race. His argument is brutal and hard to dismiss. With farming came everything we now suffer from. He wrote that we are still struggling today with the misery agriculture set loose upon us. The garden, he is saying, was real, and we walked out of it on purpose. Here is where it stops being theory and starts being bone. When you farm, you do not get a richer life. You get a narrower one. A forager eats from dozens, sometimes hundreds of different species. A farmer eats mostly one: wheat, rice, corn. Your diet collapses from a forest into a field, and the body keeps the receipts. Anthropologists can read a buried skeleton like a diary, and the diaries from the dawn of farming all tell the same grim story. Two researchers, Mark Nathan Cohen and George Armelagos, gathered these skeletons from across the world into a single landmark study of what they called the paleopathology at the origins of agriculture. The findings were consistent and damning. As people switched from foraging to farming, their health did not improve. It cracked, tooth decay exploded as starchy grain coated their teeth. Iron deficiency carved telltale scars into the bones of their skulls. Their growth was stunted. In many regions, the first farmers were measurably shorter than the foragers who came before them. One striking analysis of populations in the Eastern Mediterranean found that average height fell by inches after the shift to agriculture and did not fully recover for thousands of years. You were quite literally diminished. So picture it honestly. Your foraging ancestor was taller, had better teeth, more leisure, a varied diet, and worked perhaps 20 hours a week. Your farming ancestor was shorter, sicker, worked from sunrise to collapse, and ate the same grey porridge every single day. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your bread. The line is not poetry. It is a clinical description of what the soil did to the human body. Why would anyone choose this? That is the haunting question. And the honest answer is that no one chose it. Not in a single moment. It was a trap that closed one season at a time. Yuval Noah Harari put it in a sentence that turns the whole story upside down. We did not domesticate wheat. Wheat domesticated us. Think about what wheat demanded. It did not like rocks, so you bent your back and cleared the stones until your spine ached. It got sick, so you watered it. It was hungry, so you hauled dung to feed it. It was thirsty, so you carried water under a punishing sun. It could not defend itself, so you stood guard against the birds and the deer. A creature that 10,000 years earlier had been one wild grass among thousands had, by trading nothing but its seeds, convinced an entire species to serve it forever. And here is the cruelest part. Each small surplus let a few more babies survive, and more mouths meant there was no going back to the wild that could never feed so many. The door did not slam. It simply locked behind you, quietly, generation by generation. But there may be a stranger reason still. On a barren hilltop in southern Turkey lies a place called Göbekli Tepe. The archaeologist Klaus Schmidt spent years uncovering it, and what he found broke the timeline. Massive carved stone pillars ringed in animals and arranged into temples raised by human hands more than 11,000 years ago. That is older than writing. Older than the wheel. Older, it seems, than farming itself. The people who hauled these stones were still hunter-gatherers, and that detail rearranges everything. We always assumed people settled down to farm, and only then, with full bellies and spare time, built temples to their gods. Göbekli Tepe whispers the opposite. Maybe they built the temple first. Maybe the hunger that pulled your ancestors out of the garden was not a hunger for bread at all, but a hunger to gather, to worship, to reach for something above the world. And to feed the crowds that came to worship, they needed grain. The reaching for the divine may be the very thing that chained them to the dirt. Eat, the serpent said, and you will be like God. They reached for heaven, and the price was the field. But surplus did something else, something the garden never had. It created the storehouse, and the storehouse created a man standing in front of it. The political scientist James C. Scott spent his career on this, and his conclusion is unsettling. Grain, he argued, is the foundation of the state itself. Think about why. A forager owns almost nothing a king could take. You cannot tax a memory of where the berries grow, but grain is visible. Grain is countable. Grain ripens all at once, sits in a pile and waits. It is the perfect thing to measure, to seize, to demand a portion of. The first granaries were the first treasuries, and where there is a treasury, there is a man who guards it, a man who counts it, and very soon, a man who owns it. Hierarchy, kings, soldiers, debt, slavery. None of these existed in the garden. All of them grew from the field, as surely as the wheat did. Now go back to the serpent and listen to what it actually promises. It does not promise pleasure. It does not promise comfort. It says, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. It promises knowledge. It promises control. It promises that you will stop living inside the world's rhythm and start standing above it, deciding, planning, mastering. And precisely that is what a farmer is. A farmer is a creature who looked at the wild and said, I will no longer take what is given. I will decide what grows. The fruit of the tree of knowledge was the knowledge of how to seize control of your own survival. And the price of that knowledge was the loss of the garden where survival had been free. So the story is not really about a fruit. It is a memory, written in a language older than history. It is the memory of a species that traded a longer, freer, healthier life for control, surplus, and the strange new gods of grain and gold. The expulsion from Eden is not a fall from grace or motsun. It is the most accurate description ever written of the moment your ancestors picked up a hoe. And you are still holding it. Feel where you carry the curse. Feel it in the lower back that aches from sitting where it was built to roam. Feel it in the anxiety that hums when the storehouse feels too empty. An alarm wired into you across 10,000 harvests. Feel it in the strange, restless pull you get standing at the edge of a forest, the sense that something out there is calling you home to a place you have never been. That pull is not nostalgia. It is memory. Some part of your body still remembers a world where the food simply grew and the days were your own. We told ourselves the garden was paradise we were thrown out of by an angry god. But the truth, the bones whisper, is gentler and far more terrible. No one threw you out. You walked, you traded the garden for the grain, freedom for the storehouse, the open world for the locked field, and you called the trade progress. The serpent did not lie to you. Your eyes really were opened. You really did become like a small and tired god, deciding what grows, guarding what you own, eating your bread by the sweat of your brow. You wake up to an alarm you did not choose, and somewhere underneath the traffic and the deadlines and the quiet ache in your back, the oldest part of you is still standing at the gate of a garden, looking in, trying to remember the way back.